There is one resource that makes Vladimir Putin's war possible. Not soldiers, not missiles, not propaganda. Oil. Every ruble that pays a soldier's salary, every tank that rolls toward the front, every bureaucrat who stays loyal to the Kremlin, all of it flows, ultimately, from oil revenue. It is the financial spine of this war, and for years, Putin believed that spine was untouchable. The logic seemed sound. Russia's great refineries and export terminals sit hundreds, sometimes more than 1,000 kilometers from the front lines. No Ukrainian artillery could reach them. No Ukrainian aircraft could threaten them. And even as Western sanctions tightened, the oil kept flowing to China, to India, to buyers around the world who were happy to look the other way. Putin's energy empire appeared invulnerable. Then Ukraine rewrote the rules, not with billion-dollar missiles, not with diplomatic ultimatums, with cheap mass-produced drones that fly low and slow and carry just enough explosive to ignite something deeply flammable. The drones slipped under Russian radar, bypassed the air defense umbrella Moscow had built around its front lines, and began landing on refineries that no one thought could be reached. And by the spring of 2026, that quiet revolution in warfare had produced one of the most dramatic and consequential industrial catastrophes of the entire conflict. It happened in Tuapse. Tuapse is a small port city on Russia's Black Sea coast in the Krasnodar region, a place most people outside Russia have never heard of. In peacetime, it is a modest beach resort, the kind of city where families spend summer holidays. But sitting at its heart is one of the most strategically important industrial sites in Russia, the Rosneft oil refinery, with an annual processing capacity of around 12 million metric tons, which translates to roughly 240,000 barrels every single day. This facility is not just a refinery, it is a gateway. The naphtha, diesel, fuel oil, and vacuum gas oil produced here are loaded onto tankers that sail out through the Black Sea toward the Mediterranean, toward European buyers, toward global commodity markets. When Tuapse operates, Russia's southern energy exports flow. When Tuapse burns, that gateway closes. In April 2026, it burned 3 times. The first strike came on April 16th. Ukrainian drones targeted the port infrastructure and the storage tank farm adjacent to the refinery's primary distillation units. Large fires broke out across the facility. Operations halted immediately, not because the refinery itself was irreparably destroyed, but because the port damage made it impossible to ship the products out. The oil had nowhere to go. Within days, industry sources confirmed the refinery had suspended all production. Russia began mobilizing repair crews. Emergency response teams were deployed, but before meaningful repairs could even begin, the second strike arrived. On April 20th, Ukrainian drones hit again. They reignited fires that crews were still battling, and what followed traumatized an entire city. Combustion byproducts from burning petroleum products mixed with rainfall and descended on Tuapse as a black, oily rain. Cars were coated in dark residue. Streets were slicked with hydrocarbons. Residents photographed their windows, their balconies, their children's toys, all covered in the same black film. An oil spill spread into the Black Sea, visible in satellite imagery. Environmental experts called it a regional catastrophe, the worst in years. 24 storage tanks were confirmed destroyed in that second attack. 4 more were damaged. 61% of the facility's fuel storage capacity had become, in the official language of damage assessments, unusable. And before Russia could process the scale of that destruction, the third strike came. On the night of April 28th, Krasnodar Regional Governor Veniamin Kondratiev was forced to announce yet another large-scale fire at the refinery. Burning petroleum products boiled over from damaged storage tanks and spilled directly onto the road outside the facility, flowing down Koshkina Street toward residential buildings. Vehicles were damaged. Water supply was disrupted across dozens of streets. Scores of residents lost power. And then the evacuation order came. Residents living closest to the refinery were directed to board buses to the nearest school, which had been converted into a temporary shelter. More than 300 firefighters were deployed to fight this third blaze. Airports at Krasnodar, Gelendzhik, and Sochi imposed temporary flight restrictions. Russia's emergency situations minister was dispatched to the city by Putin himself, and still the fires burned. Russia's official public health authority issued a statement telling residents there was no health risk, that the situation was under control, that experts were conducting regular measurements. It was a statement designed to calm. It had the opposite effect, because residents of Tuapse had heard it before, not in Tuapse but in Chernobyl, not in 2026 but in 1986. The reflexive pattern of Soviet and post-Soviet crisis management is always the same: downplay, dismiss, reassure. And the people of Tuapse knew the script. Posts began spreading on social media under a phrase that needed no translation: our Chernobyl. The scale is different, of course. Chernobyl was a nuclear catastrophe. Tuapse is a petrochemical disaster. But the instinct of the state to tell people everything is fine while everything is clearly not is identical 40 years on. And that recognition, spreading through Russian social media in a country where open dissent remains dangerous, is itself a political event. Satellite imagery added a final, almost surreal detail to the crisis. The oil slick spreading from the stricken terminal was drifting southward along the Black Sea coast, directly toward Cape Idokopas, where Putin's private palace sits on a private promontory above the water. The consequences of his war had arrived, literally, at his doorstep. But Tuapse was only one front in a campaign that had become, by late April 2026, truly national in scale. The day after the third Tuapse strike, Ukrainian drones reached 2 new targets simultaneously, demonstrating a strike range and a logistical coordination that Russia had no credible answer to. In Orsk, in the Orenburg region of southeastern Russia, drones struck the Orsk Nefty Orgsyntez refinery, a facility located approximately 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. This is one of Russia's larger inland refineries, processing around 6 million tons of crude oil annually, supplying gasoline, diesel, kerosene, and other fuels to the Ural and Volga regions. It had previously been struck in October and November of 2025. Ukraine was now applying its deliberate, repeated strike doctrine to this facility as well, hitting it again before repairs from previous attacks had been completed, extending the downtime, denying Russia the chance to restore capacity. On that same day, in Perm, deep in the Ural Mountains, a Transneft oil pumping station was set on fire. The Perm linear production and dispatch station is not a refinery. It is something more strategically significant: a hub, a junction point in the main arterial network of Russian pipeline infrastructure, where multiple major trunk lines converge and where oil is received, stored, and then redistributed in 4 directions to serve refineries and export routes across the eastern half of the country. When you strike a refinery, you reduce one facility's output. When you strike a hub, you disrupt every pipeline connected to that hub simultaneously. And this hub carries a staggering volume. Transneft, the state monopoly that operates it, handles more than 80% of Russia's total crude oil production. The fires that broke out following the April 29th strike consumed multiple large storage tanks. By the following morning, emergency loudspeakers in parts of Perm were broadcasting a chemical hazard alert. Residents reported a sharp, acrid smell. Officials denied any hazardous release and simultaneously claimed the chemical alert people heard was a scheduled test, a claim that satisfied no one. The day before those Perm and Orsk strikes, on the night of April 25th to 26th, the Yaroslavl oil refinery, known as the Janos refinery, had been struck some 800 kilometers from the front lines. This facility holds a particular distinction. It is one of Russia's largest refineries, processing around 15 million tons of crude per year and operating with a daily throughput capacity in the range of 500,000 barrels. The Ukrainian drone strike targeted its vacuum distillation unit, one of the most critical and hardest-to-replace components in any refinery, and took the facility offline with a single, precisely aimed hit. Place these locations on a map. Tuapse on the southern Black Sea coast, Yaroslavl in Russia's northwest, Perm in the Urals to the east, Orsk in the southeast. Add to these the earlier strikes on refineries in Saratov, Syzran, and Novokuybishevsk from preceding weeks. What emerges is not a list of individual attacks. It is a strategic picture. Ukraine is striking Russia's entire energy geography simultaneously, from the Black Sea to the Baltic, from the Volga River basin to the edge of Kazakhstan. The economic consequences are concrete and measurable. The shutdown of the Tuapse facility alone removed approximately 240,000 barrels of daily refining capacity from service. But the knock-on effects compound that loss. The tanker traffic that normally moved through Tuapse has to be rerouted, primarily to Novorossiysk, a port whose own infrastructure is already under strain and cannot easily absorb the additional load. The bottleneck this creates affects not just exports but the broader logistics of Russia's oil economy. Analysts tracking Ukrainian strikes across all affected facilities in this period estimate that the total reduction in operational daily production amounts to several 100,000 barrels per day, with disruptions to export capacity at various points reaching higher still. From a military standpoint, every barrel that does not get refined is a barrel of fuel that does not reach the front lines. Tanks run on diesel. Aircraft run on jet fuel. Logistics convoys run on gasoline. When refinery capacity contracts, the military supply chain tightens. Russia does not have infinite reserves, and the cumulative pressure of 18 months of targeted strikes on its refining infrastructure is visible in the logistics data. And there is a second military consequence that compounds the first. Russia is being forced to redeploy air defense systems away from the front. Every S-400 battery redeployed to protect a refinery in Krasnodar is a battery that is no longer covering positions in Donetsk or Zaporizhia. Russia's air defense network, already stretched across an enormous territory, cannot be everywhere at once. Every redeployment creates a gap. Ukraine is exploiting this dilemma deliberately, varying its target geography from night to night to force Russian planners into an endless redistribution game they cannot win. The political consequences of this campaign may ultimately prove more destabilizing than the economic ones. On Russian state television, the platform that normally maintains the fiction of a controlled, victorious war, one of the Kremlin's most prominent propagandists erupted on camera after the Tuapse strikes. He demanded to know why Russia could not set up adequate air defense for its own territory. He stated, for a national television audience, that outside of Moscow, Russia has no functional air defense network remaining. These words, from a man whose professional purpose is to project confidence in the Russian state, amounted to an admission of strategic vulnerability that no official press release had ever come close to making. In Tuapse itself, residents filmed themselves against backdrops of black skies and columns of flame and said plainly, without apparent fear of the camera, that the state had failed them, that it was shameful to be treated this way, that they had been abandoned. The war, which state media had for years presented as something happening in a distant place to other people, had come home to Tuapse. And the anger spreading through its streets is not directed at Ukraine, it is directed at Moscow. That anger matters for reasons that go deeper than public sentiment. The Tuapse refinery belongs to Rosneft. At the head of Rosneft sits Igor Sechin, one of the most powerful figures in Putin's inner circle, a man whose association with Putin predates the latter's presidency, who built and has long controlled Russia's most valuable energy empire. The fires burning in Tuapse are burning a hole in Sechin's balance sheet. Billions of dollars in annual export capacity is going up in smoke. He is not alone. Transneft, the pipeline monopoly targeted in the Perm strikes, is a state enterprise whose senior figures and beneficiaries are woven through the highest levels of Russian power. The arrangement that has sustained Putin's authoritarian compact for more than 2 decades rests on a simple and largely unspoken deal. The oligarchs and state enterprise chiefs make money from energy, and in exchange they remain loyal and compliant. That compact was built on the assumption that the energy infrastructure generating those profits was safe. It no longer is. As revenues fall and facilities burn, the unspoken questions multiplying behind closed doors in Moscow are about accountability and about whether the man at the top can still deliver on his end of the bargain. Russia's foreign partners are watching all of this closely. China and India, which together have absorbed the bulk of Russian oil that Western buyers stopped purchasing after the 2022 invasion, understand perfectly well that a seller whose infrastructure is burning has no alternatives and therefore has no leverage. Every reduction in Russian export capacity strengthens their negotiating position. Every fire in a Tuapse storage tank is another reason to push for a lower price. The historical resonance of what is unfolding in Tuapse is impossible to ignore for anyone familiar with the Second World War. In the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany launched what it called Operation Edelweiss, a major offensive into the Caucasus whose primary strategic objective was seizing the Soviet oil fields at Maykop, Grozny, and Baku. Hitler's calculation was simple. Without oil, the Soviet war machine would stop. German forces advanced through the region in the summer and autumn of that year, reaching the Soviet oil fields at Maykop, only to find that Soviet forces had set fire to their own wells and refineries before withdrawing. The black smoke that rose over the Caucasus that autumn was the smoke of a scorched earth strategy, of a nation burning its own resources rather than let an enemy use them. Tuapse was a critical node in that 1942 campaign as well, a Black Sea port and refinery hub that served as the gateway for Soviet oil exports. It was fought over, bombed, and eventually held by Soviet defenders, who paid an enormous price to keep it from falling. 8 decades later, the same city is experiencing the same imagery: black smoke, burning tanks, oil fouling a shoreline, civilians caught between an industrial catastrophe and a government telling them everything is fine. The method has changed entirely. In 1942, it required a land army of hundreds of thousands and fleets of bomber aircraft. Today, it requires drones that cost a few $1,000s each, guided by navigation software, operated from facilities that Russia has not yet found a way to destroy. The logic is identical, only the price has changed. and that change in price is transforming the strategic balance of this war. Russia has no satisfying answer to any of this. The sheer scale of the infrastructure it must defend, thousands of kilometers of pipeline, dozens of major refineries, hundreds of storage terminals, export ports on 3 separate seas, makes comprehensive protection impossible. Air defense systems are finite. Skilled repair engineers are in short supply, their work further hampered by sanctions that have made the specialized Western-designed components that once kept Russian refineries running nearly impossible to source. Ukraine's tactic of repeated strikes on the same targets, hitting Tuapse again before the fires from the previous attack are even fully out, returning to Orsk while damage assessments from the last raid are still incomplete, is designed precisely to prevent those repairs from ever being finished. What Ukraine has built here is a kinetic sanctions regime. For years, the G7 debated comprehensive energy sanctions against Russia, argued over exceptions, worried about market effects, and ultimately implemented measures that fell well short of what the situation warranted. Ukrainian drones have, in a matter of months, delivered something far more targeted and far more effective than anything those diplomatic negotiations ever produced. Ukraine's president has described these strikes as the most effective and rapid sanctions ever applied to Russia's energy sector. That assessment is not an exaggeration. Every refinery that burns shrinks the Kremlin's war budget. Every pipeline hub that goes offline reduces the fuel available to Russian forces in the field. Every Russian family forced to evacuate their home in the shadow of a burning tank farm understands, at the most visceral level, that this war has costs. Costs that Moscow has tried for 4 years to keep invisible from the Russian public. The invisible has become visible. The oil is literally falling from the sky. Russia's propagandists can no longer maintain the fiction that the home front is untouched. Russia's officials can no longer credibly claim that everything is under control. And Russia's oligarchs, watching billions in refinery capacity go up in smoke, are left to wonder whether the man they have empowered has any plan at all to stop it. Tuapse is burning. Perm is burning. Orsk is burning. Yaroslavl burned last week, and the week before that, another city. Ukraine's drones find a new target every night. Another refinery, another pumping station, another export terminal. And Russia cannot stop them. Because defending an empire built on oil requires protecting everything, and protecting everything is impossible. Ukraine has found the lifeline, and it is cutting it, one refinery at a time.